Welcome to Peninsula Seniors Out and About. Today we're at the Western Museum of Flight in Torrance for one of their celebrity lectures. Let's go see what Cindy has for us today.
Welcome everyone to the Western Museum of Flight. I'm Cindy Maka and I'm the director of the museum. Today I'm going to call forward one of our advisors, Dale Hoffman, who was one of the general managers for TRW, and he will introduce our guest today. Thank you.
I would like to make the introduction of our presenter for today, Robert Frimsis. Bob is an engineer by training. He has worked at all levels of engineering up through management at both Hughes Aircraft and TRW, and also established a company of his own.
Thank you, Dale. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here and to be able to tell you my inspirational story. I have a life story to tell you about. I think I'm one of the extremely fortunate people that can tell that kind of a story. The title of the book and my story is From Tajikistan to the Moon. And the reason I've written a book is because I've made a solemn promise to my mother at the age of 10 during falling bombs and strafing of the German Luftwaffe. Every time we survived another attack, she'd tell me, "Now you got to promise me to write a book to tell the world what happened to innocent people so it would not be repeated." And my answer was always, "Yes, Mama, but first we got to survive." When I've written the book, I've gotten this kind of a comment from the chairman of the board and the CEO of, at the time, of Northrop Grumman Corporation. And he's writing that I was his boss and a mentor and a role model for his growth in his life. I'll start my story at the age of 5. I mean, that is the earliest of my recollections. And we lived in a city of belts, and it's at the time it was called Bessarabia. Since then, it was Moldova, an independent republic. As you see, the spelling depends on pretty much who was in charge at the time. When I was 5 years old, the region was under Romanian control. The region itself is east of the region of Bessarabia or of Moldova is Ukraine, and west of it is Romania. It borders with Romania. Here in the northern part, you can see belts. The city was of the order of about 100,000 population. The region was always Russian, and it was actually formally joined the Russian Tsarist Russia in 1812. So when I was 5 years old, it was Romanian. How do I know about it? Well, that's the time when you normally sort of get out of the house and you start playing with the local kids in the neighborhood. And my first shock was they're making fun of me. They cannot understand me. I cannot understand them. I speak only Russian. That was my mother tongue. It so happened that we lived in a predominantly Jewish neighborhood, and everybody spoke Yiddish, and I did not speak Yiddish at the time. At the same time, at the age of 5, I go to kindergarten. Not to my surprise, but the only language that they speak and teach is Romanian. I did not speak a word of Romanian either at the time. So I start off by saying at the age of 5, I was a foreigner in my own country. And little did I realize that I'll remain a foreigner for many, many years to come, with all its implications, all of which are negative, I assure you. To go on, at the age of 9, On June 28, 1940, we wake up to a tremendous parade, courtesy of the Red Army. The Red Army marched into our region, and without firing a single shot, we became Soviet citizens. Well, I was happy about one thing, that I was able to speak Russian. I belonged to a large, powerful country, I thought at the time, and instead of Romania, which we really never sort of cared about. And we sort of felt like they were like the occupiers. Well, my pride and happiness lasted for maybe about 6 months at most. We immediately realized what it meant to live in the Soviet Union and be a Soviet citizen. The region we lived in was a region of plenty, of everything available. And within a short period of time, we realized that the Soviets started hoarding everything they could and send it back to the interior of the country. The other thing we realized, my grandfather, who lived next door to us, and he had several houses. In fact, the house we lived in belonged to my grandfather, and he built a house for each one of his children. He actually died within 9 months or so after the Soviets came in. And we always felt, at least he felt also, that the reason he died is for fear that he will end up in jail at his old age, end up in prison. To sort of explain what do I mean by that, it so happens that he owned a small restaurant, which was the front room of the house. And I sort of say restaurant with my tongue and mouth. In reality, what he was selling is whiskey and wine and so on, and some cold food, but primarily the clientele were the villagers from the surrounding villages that were coming in. Originally, at his young age, he was a blacksmith, and he was traveling through various villages and taking care of horses and wagons and the like. So, of course, once he got married and he was able to prosper and buy a house, and so he became a restaurateur. So that was pretty much the clientele. I describe in the book how the backyard, we had a large backyard, which was between the two houses, where was most of the time we had horses and wagons of the various villagers that would come in and park their horses and wagons there and eat and drink and then go to the market and sell their wares and so on. So the Soviets have imposed such tremendous taxes on everybody that had any kind of a business that really forced everybody out, and that was really the purpose of those high taxes. And he was just constantly in fear that he was never going to be able to pay those taxes to the Soviet government at the time. Interestingly enough, to continue, the youngest brother of my mother was the proud of the family. There were 5 children. He was the youngest, and he was a doctor. He was a medical doctor. So he was obviously the one with the most education and the proud parents, as well as known within the city and so on. Well, the Soviets came in, and as soon as they came in, they handed everybody a Soviet passport. And he had the privilege, the distinction of getting a passport with what they referred to as a paragraph 39 at the time. That implied as a undesirable, meaning that he is a capitalist. I mean, now, he did not have employees, but he had a beautiful home, and he was a young doctor and so on. So that just describes the life under the Soviet regime, at least the beginning of it. And of course, it went on as it went on from then on, and worse and worse. I always do not fail when I speak to tell people how proud we should be to be American citizens. And of course, most of you have been born here and have not had the privilege of having been born here and not had the chance of comparison to live in any other country and to see the difference. So we should be very proud of America. At the age of 10, a year later, in fact, a year minus 6 days, on June 22nd, 1941, at 4 in the morning, we woke up to some rambling, some noise, some earth shaking. It so happened that a year earlier, we had a tremendous earthquake, sort of the only earthquake that at least I witnessed in the region. And consequently, everybody ran out in the streets and waiting for fear that the houses might fall in and you might get hurt and so on. Well, here it is again. We sort of hear the same kind of environmental feeling of shaking and noise, and we ran out of the house again and assuming that it's another earthquake. Well, as soon as the sun sort of started coming out, we saw a couple of airplanes having a dogfight in the sky over our city. Again, we weren't quite sure that we're at war. The speculation, because we didn't want to really believe that we're at war. Speculation was that, well, the Soviets are probably conducting exercises in preparation for war. Well, only about an hour later, we had a tremendous explosion, and half of the city got covered in black smoke. What happened is actually that they managed a direct hit on the fuel depot, the fuel tanks of the airport that was outside of the city. And that was a tremendous smoke that came out, black smoke. And we, at that time, knew that we were actually at war. It was only 8 hours later, from 4 in the morning till 12 noon, that Vyacheslav Mikhailovich Molotov, Tovarish Molotov, right? That's Comrade Molotov, went on TV, on radio, and made the announcement that Germany has attacked us and that we are at war. That's after the fact that we were already felt that the consequences of that. We had daily bombardments, fairly easy, and then about 3 days later, 3 to 4, I'm not quite sure, at around 4 or 5 in the afternoon, they started bombarding again the city, and when a bomb fell within about a block of our house, we all ran out of the house and ran several blocks away. It so happened that it was a sort of, I can't call it really a deserted area, but it's a less populated area, and it was primarily occupied by a Polish population. So we ended up several, I'd say about 4 blocks or 4.5 blocks away from our house, and we watched in horror a whole night how our whole city and primarily our neighborhood, including our house, went off and down, off in smoke and ashes and down to nothing, rumble. And my father managed the last minute to run in, and I describe it as to how worried we were. It took him about an hour to collect whatever he could carry from the burning house. And in fact, as he walked out when the ceiling, when the roof collapsed on him. So he just managed, to come out of there. And that morning, most of our family was there, and that because that was the only place that we actually could survive at a time. It was my father's idea, and he made a bit of a speech to the rest of the family saying, I don't know about you folks, but I'm out of here, I'm leaving, I'm not going to sit and wait. It so happens that Belz was only about 50 kilometers from the border with Romania. And his reasoning was that it will not take long for Germany to cover the 50 kilometers and occupy us. And he felt that we knew at the time, we knew of France being occupied, we knew of all the countries, the Netherlands, of course Poland, and which came first, were all occupied. And we heard pretty bad stories about German Nazi behavior. So with that in mind, we pretty much took off. The rest of the family, those that could not, 11 members of the family were brutally murdered by the hands of the Nazis and their sympathizers. And the first page of my book is really dedicated to them. We started a trip, a long trip, first by foot, and after a while we managed to get a couple of horses and a wagon, and literally from early morning to late at night, and the heat of the day and then the wet of the rain, we slept every night on the wet ground. And the worst part of it were two issues. One was starvation, there really was no food, and the second, excuse me, was the fact that we were constantly bombed. I mean, every time there was an airplane passing by, whether it was his mission or their mission or not, they saw a bunch of people moving, they just come down and start strafing and bombing and so on. And it's amazing that how, should we say, statistics, God, who knows what, that we'd end up alive with dead people on our right and dead people to the left. And after every one of those episodes, Mom would repeat that same thing: you must promise me to write a book and tell the world about it. We went on like that for many, many days and nights and weeks and months. And I describe the worst episode. The Ukrainians weren't exactly very friendly to the people that were coming across their country, moving eastward. I mean, the only thing you could do is move eastward. And I describe an episode where after a couple of days of not eating anything, my father managed to trade a suit of clothes that he had for a bread. And I remember the woman saying that it's very nice of me to do it all together, because all I have to do is wait a couple of days and I'll have the bread as well as the suit of clothes, because the Germans are on the corner. And indeed, as we were leaving a village, we'd find out that 2 days later, that village would be occupied by the Nazis. So we were fortunate to have basically evaded Nazi occupation. I don't know how, and but it was, we managed it. As 3 months approached, and remember we started off in June, and it started getting cold and wet. And remember, this is the Soviet Union, this is in Ukraine. My father decided to finally take the railroad. He was basically avoiding trains, avoiding city, avoiding large towns. He'd be mapping out in every place that he would find a map, a route that avoided cities and trains and railroad tracks, because those were major targets. So we were forced to take the train. Now, excuse me. When I say take the train, that doesn't mean exactly that you go to a railroad station and you buy a couple of tickets or 3 tickets and no. You just go and look for some railroads and look at that area either where the train would stop or would slow down and hope to be able to pick anything that goes eastward. And yes, indeed, we traveled on all of those. Open platforms, cars with cattle cars, anything. And of course, we'd be changing trains as soon as we realized that a train started stopping or started deviating from the route that we had in mind of going eastward. Again, those trains had the least priority as far as the military trains had the major priority of movement. So consequently, it took forever. And about 3 months, closer to 4 months, we ended up covering over 3,000 miles in the region called Tajikistan. Tajikistan borders on the east with China. That means we could not possibly go further east in the Soviet Union unless we take the northern route to Siberia, and nobody wanted to do that. Well, we finally reached Tajikistan. We found for the first time in my life that I've seen a house which wasn't a house. It was a mud house. I don't know how many of you know what a mud house is. I didn't know what a mud house was, but I'll define it for you. The roof is made out of mud, the ceiling is made out of mud, the floor is made out of mud, and the walls are mud. Consequently, I call it a mud hut. It had a small door with a couple of windows, and my father was immediately mobilized in the Red Army. And for a long time, for a while, we had communication with him, and then for a long time, we did not hear from him. And we were worried, and we did not want to think of what the consequences meant. And after many, many months, we finally got a letter from a military hospital where he was writing that he was recuperating from his wounds and he was fighting in the battles to defend Stalingrad. I don't know how many of you have heard of what went on in Stalingrad, but that is where the Soviets have finally stopped the advance of the German might, if you will, at the time. The battles lasted for 7 months, and the Soviets have lost 1.2 million people just in the battles of Stalingrad. And we were then delighted, if you can see what that means, to be delighted that your father is wounded, but nonetheless, I mean, that he's alive, the fact that he made it. Now to go back to the mud hut where my mom and I lived, my mom who never worked a day in her life because back in those days it was not fashionable, if you will, for a woman to work. I mean, unless you're really in dire need and poverty, and even then it was sort of an embarrassment. So consequently, of course, my mom never worked, and she got a job, and I went to school. Went to 6th grade. And the first week in school, I was surrounded by a bunch of kids from my class, and they beat the daylights out of me. Now, mind you, I was Russian. I spoke the language as well as them. Correction, better than them. Blue eyes. At the time, I had blonde hair. But I was Jewish, and they knew that. So there was enough reason for them to beat the hell out of me. Now, I stress that it's not a big deal. Now, there were many, many worse things that were happening elsewhere. But mind you, this is in a country where their constitution says that all citizens are equal. And I keep on stressing that, especially to the American public, because I also say that the book is written primarily, if you will, from a Soviet perspective, or unique Soviet perspective, because I am not aware, there might be a book or two, but I'm not aware of any book that describes life in the Soviet Union, especially during the war. And that is why I'm stressing that point. We lived in extreme poverty is not the word. I mean, starvation is the word, really. The Soviet regime allowed you 400 grams of bread per person. Now, believe it or not, I do not eat 400 grams a day today. I'm not sure I eat 400 grams in a week. But when you consider the bread that they had, it was black, it was like a brick, it was wet. 400 grams was like 2 slices, or 3 at most, of bread, and that was primarily what you lived on. Here's a picture of me in 1942. I'm extremely proud of my portrait. It's going straight to Hollywood. I mean, that kind of a picture, right? That's just to show you as to what the situation was like. At the age of 12 and a half, in the 7th grade, in the middle of the 7th grade, I gave up school. I was forced to leave school and get my first full-time job. Now, I was small, and you see what I looked like, and I got a job where my mom pretty much got me a job where she worked to be a helper to the electrician at the time. And here is a year later, much improved picture of myself, because number one, when you go to work, you're allowed 600 grams of bread. Now, mind you, it's not much, but it's 50% more than 400, last I thought, right? Last I calculated. So, the mud hut, of course, didn't have any running water or electricity, or not even a outhouse. So nature somehow takes care of things, not even an outhouse. So the first thing I did is within the first 6 months, I was able to install electricity in that mud house. And believe it or not, for blocks, ours was the only mud hut with electricity. I was also able to then build a little hot plate, so we were able to do some cooking of whatever, or boiling water. By the way, it's interesting to know as to what it is that we've used prior to that, that was still used for heating at the time. It was pretty much manure that you could collect with some straw and dry it on the roof, because myself, I was able to reach the roof. I mean, that's how low that place was, and so on. So we had electricity, and our life improved tremendously, I guess. About close to 3 years later, our city was liberated. And once our city was liberated, we thought that we ought to be returning to our city. We knew that there isn't much to return to. However, we also knew that we did not come to live in Tajikistan. Here is a letter that we've written to a cousin of mine in Uzbekistan at the time. We knew she was the only survivor, at least at the time we thought that she was the only survivor. And we wrote to her that since our city has been liberated, it's time to go back, and I hope that you'll go back too. And so we'll somehow stay together. And about 50 years later, that cousin came to visit me when we lived in Palos Verdes and brought me this letter, this yellow piece of paper. I always point out that stamp. That is a stamp by the government saying that we have reviewed it and it's okay to pass on. Another indication of what it means to live in the Soviet Union, for all of those that don't know. The letter we've written in flowering terms about the mighty Red Army that has liberated our city, and we're proud to return back home. Had we not written that, that letter probably would have never gotten through. Having come back to the city, we indeed were not surprised. The city was completely destroyed. In fact, the city was 75% destroyed. Our neighborhood was absolutely gone. I mean, we were going and counting holes and sort of mounds and sort of estimating that this must have been our house, or what used to be our house. We could not find a place absolutely to live. I mean, to get a room to live in was a big issue. And of course, getting employment is another issue. So we then, and anti-Semitism was rampant throughout the Soviet Union. So we, at that time, made a decision that we will leave the Soviet Union one way or another. So we're just waiting for my dad to be released from the Red Army. And as soon as he was released, he just slept over one night, and we sent him out to another city, Chernovitz, which is just north of our region, to find some place to live. And not only that, we already planned to leave the Soviet Union. How do you leave the Soviet Union? You do not go to a council and say, I want a visa to Romania or to wherever. So you got a plan of escaping from the Soviet Union. Now, to escape from the Soviet Union, that is not an easy task. We all knew very, very well that we were making bogus papers, and should they detect those papers, my dad would have been shot on the spot. Us, they wouldn't have wasted a bullet on. They would just ship us, not even to Tajikistan or Uzbekistan, but they'd be shipping us to the northern route. I don't want to say any more about it. With all that in mind, facing Siberia, facing death, we made a decision that it's worth to try instead of living in the Soviet Union, because there was absolutely no way no future for anybody. So armed with those papers, we crossed the border into Romania. And I describe in great detail as to how my dad's voice was shaking and how we actually made it. Of course, we reached Romania, and my parents settled in the city of Galați, right close to the border. We came, remember, from Belts, from here. And actually, when we crossed the border, we crossed from the region which used to be at one time part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So there were many people that were basically really not Russian. So it was easier to sort of say that you're repatriating with false papers back to Romania, that we were, indeed, that we were not Russians at the time. Once we reached Romania, our goal was indeed to go to America. To our extreme surprise and sorrow, we realized that there's no way one can go to America from Romania. There was no American consul, there was no way to get there. And at that time, we found out that indeed the only way you can get there is to go to Italy. Well, I wasn't going to sit and wait for all that. So I joined a group of youngsters with the intent of going to Palestine. At that time, that was before the State of Israel was born. We worked hard there in the preparation to go there. When it came time, about 6 months within being there, I was called in and I was told that there's some people that I'll be going, but you're not going. And the reason they said is because they're grooming me for leadership, management. Now, mind you, I'm 16 years old. What kind of management, what kind of leadership, you know? They were sending me to Bucharest, to classes, and, you know, and the like. So with that in mind, I say, I'm not hanging out here. I'm out of here. We really did not escape from the Soviet Union in order to live in Romania. So we, again, at the cover of darkness of night, crossed by foot, walked the whole night from Romania into Hungary. I mean, we're taking after walking, so we're taking the train. Well, the first thing we were told is, if you have a watch, take it off. I mean, imagine somebody comes over, I mean, you're illegal, but somebody comes over and asks you what time is it. You're dead. You don't know what he asked you, you don't know how to answer. So most of the time we try to make believe we were asleep. And I describe in great detail as to when the Russians and the Hungarians came to check on passports, and somehow I had a passport of a 25-year-old and dark hair, and I had to memorize his name and birthplace, and the same for my parents. Somehow they just looked at the passport and they just passed us by. And then we come to Budapest, and we're all on our own, and we don't know what to do. Where do you go from there? You don't speak the language, you don't have a cent. So we were told that, wait, somebody is going to come and pick you up. Now imagine the scene of being in a huge station and police roaming all over. We get out of it somehow, and in front of the station, I'll never forget it, there's like a monument or like a water fountain. So we're trying to hide from the police. So we're trying to be invisible to the police, invisible to somebody, not knowing who that somebody is, right? And after about an hour of waiting, a truck passes by and sort of looks us over and pulls over a little half a block further. And a young man comes out and asks my father in Yiddish, do you speak Yiddish? And of course my father said yes. That was basically the passport. Says, follow me. So I hopped in a truck, and that truck led us all the way, into Budapest, and left us and said at night they'll come and pick us up. They picked us up. We went through the border with Austria, and from Austria we went, after waiting there a while, went to Italy. Now to cross Italy, to get to Italy, you have to cross the tallest mountains in Europe. Those are the Alps, by foot. I had the privilege of doing it twice, because after we got there in the morning, I'd been walking up by the Carabinieri. Those are the Guardia Patrol, the Italian Guardia Patrol, marched up all the youngsters on the rifle and marched us back across the borders. And that was very nice of them, because they left the parents, they left everybody else there, in that camp where we were. At any rate, we got back. Later we got to Milano. For the first time in my life, we found DP camps. DP at the time, ladies and gentlemen, did not stand for data processing. It stood for displaced persons. For the first time, now we had a roof over our head, 3 meals, not exactly gourmet, but we were not hungry. And above all, the main thing is we were able to register with the American Consul. And from then on, all we have to do is sit and wait. Now, the worst part in DP camps, we realized, was boredom. You sit and wait. You never know when or if you'll ever get a visa or ever get a call. I found a school at the time over there called ORT, O-R-T. It's an international organization, roughly translated into Organization for Rehabilitation and Training. I joined a class of electricians, electrical. Of course, the work was very easy for me. I, in fact, didn't learn anything there. So what I've done is I started borrowing books in the ORT office and math and physics, and I started studying on my own. And I did some drafting for them in the office. And after I finished that course, I took a course in motor winding and just to hang out. Why? Because they were saying, there were rumors that there is going to be, the Ort is going to open up their first college level school. I mean, these were trade schools. And they asked for us to apply for that school. So there were 400 applicants throughout Italy. It turned out that they accepted only 2. I was one of the 2 out of 400 of the fortunate ones that were accepted. And all of a sudden, I am in Switzerland. I left the DP camps forever, never to see him again. I'm an international student. Above all, I know that I will never be a blue-collar worker again, because I knew that, well, there's no way I can go to school otherwise. Well, we were doing very well. The lessons were in French. Everything was, because it was in Geneva. And that's what the International Ort Organization was, together with the Red Cross at the time, and the League of Nations, and so on. And there were about 63 boys, the inaugural class, from almost as many countries, speaking all kind of languages. And of course, we all had to learn French. Now imagine studying sort of engineering classes. It's pretty tough to study in your own tongue, in your own language. Try to study it in a foreign tongue. To make it just a little more exciting, it so happened that there were 4 or 5 students that their mother tongue was French, because they came from Morocco, and they came from Belgium, and and the like. So nonetheless, after 6 months, we all spoke French well, and it was tremendous. I mean, we really had a great life and a great future. Well, about 6 months, we get notice from my parents, you got to come home, because the American Consul says the visas are ready. With great reluctance, I went and left. I say with great reluctance, I wanted to come to America, obviously, but I felt that if I come to America, I'll never have the opportunity for an education, to go to school. My understanding at the time was that the schools, America has some of the finest universities, but they had a big but. The but is they're only for the rich. And knowing that I'll come as a poor immigrant, I will never be able to do it. So that's the reason I wasn't very happy about it. Well, I come back, so I'm back in the DP camps for a while, which I hope that I'll never see again. And to my great surprise, I find out that my parents had only 2 visas. The council knew that I was studying in Switzerland, so they took me off the list. Now I have to talk in my parents to go to America without me. And of course, they don't want to do it. They finally left, and I'm left in the DP camps again, waiting for a visa. Well, at the age of 19, with $20, I had a $20 bill in my pocket, and with very little English, and with no formal education, I come into America. Unfortunately, we were supposed to come into New York, but we had a terrible trip. Our trip was, I describe it, Columbus, I understand, came with 3 ships. One of them was Maria. Well, I came on that ship, I believe. It took us, I left on the 4th of April, 4th of May, out of Genoa, and I arrived on the 27th of May, 24 days later, and we arrived in Baltimore, in the port of Baltimore. So the first thing I had to do is get a ticket, go to the train station and get a ticket to Grand Central. And that, I remember, cost somewhere $6 and change. And I got to Grand Central, and I got a taxi. My parents lived in Brooklyn at the time. And I paid the cab, and I ended up with, I don't know, some $10 or less than $10 in my pocket, less than 10, about $8. And that's when I came to America. I mean, I'll never forget that. I still have that $10, I believe, somewhere. In America, the first thing, my intent was to get an education. I went to school at night, and I got my, I made up basically all the regents exams in the high 90s. And of course, English and American history, I had 65, and that's out of pity, and armed with that, I went to City College. They let me take the entrance exam. I passed the entrance exam, and years later, I became an engineer. Believe it or not, my first job was with Curtiss-Wright, the electronics division, building flight simulators. So I had to buy a book and flight dynamics. I remember Perkin and Haig. I never studied that, and I had to linearize equations and build special purpose analog computers to solve these equations and so on. I was fortunate once I got my master's degree from Columbia University in 1960. I was brought out here to San Diego. I was fortunate to work on lunar studies at the General Dynamics Astronautics, and I was heading up the study with very little knowledge that I had at the time. I didn't know how to spell trajectories, but nonetheless, that's what we were developing as trajectories and guidance and so on. And when the report came up and it went to the library, I started getting offers from North American Aviation, who got the Apollo program at the time. Trying to accelerate it. Well, in the Apollo program, I started off in guidance and control and studies. As soon as they find out that you're in the simulation business, I ended up to be the head of the flight of the Apollo mission simulator. And here is a picture. We got a trophy for that. So the Apollo mission simulator is supposed to be representing the spacecraft and all its aspects, okay? So you're trying to put in the characteristics of the spacecraft. You're also trying to build it before the spacecraft because you've got to have enough time for the astronauts to get training on the simulator. Well, it's a catch-22. You try to build a simulator and you do not have the information, the complete information in it, about it. It so happens that NASA had at the time, assigned astronauts, one or two, to each major system, which they considered a major system. And of course, the Apollo mission simulator was a major system. So they, at the time, assigned 2 astronauts. The senior guy was Charlie Bassett. The second guy was a guy by the name of Neil Armstrong. Unfortunately, Charlie Bassett got killed, most of you probably know, flying just a test mission in St. Louis. Just sort of, unfortunately, it happened. So that left young Neil Armstrong to be the head guy, to work with me. So we spent many hours in my office arguing, arm wrestling. I go through some of the details. In order to build this simulator, for instance, we had difficulty, with the characteristics, but nonetheless, we fought about it, and that was my job, pretty much, to get it and to get it going and make it happen. The problem that we had is with out-window displays. Well, we had out-of-window displays. Well, simulator, the Apollo doesn't tell you what you're going to see looking out the window. So we sort of drew a map and colored it, and then we found out that Gordo Cooper was the only astronaut that claimed that he saw trains going on and so on, So off we went to Gordo and spent days talking with him, and Gordo, speak slower because we're taking notes. You see, Florida should be a little more green, and California should be a little more brown here. Imagine the specification. That's a real technical term, a little more green, a little more brown, right? But nonetheless, that's what we had to do. We built a simulator. Obviously, well, we did not build a simulator. Sorry. Once all the design was pretty much completed, I took off. I was no longer interested in that. I was pretty much never interested really in nuts and bolts, So I was looking for other challenges. I left North American and I went to Hughes Aircraft at the time. Why? Because they had the surveyor program. So over there I ended up as the assistant department manager for the trajectory department. I was also, the primary responsibility in addition to that I had was what we called lovingly the Hopper experiment. We kept on doing analysis and making and building trajectories that we can lift off the spacecraft after it's taken enough photos and scraped enough the surface and analyzed the stones and rocks and all that, that why can't we lift off the spacecraft and translate it and move it over? Now, the spacecraft was not designed to do that. That was not, but we saw no reason why you could not lift that, why you could not light the engines. Now remember, it had gyros. Now there's no such thing as this group I can talk about, no such thing as a perfectly flat surface. So we knew it's never going to land on a completely flat surface. So whatever the inclination, whatever it landed on, that is registered in the gyro, and it's left at that. Now all you have to do is light the engines, and it's going to go in that direction. As long as you're going to burn the engines, it's going to keep on going. Once you stop, it's going to come down, right? So we ended up with this kind of a trajectory here. So we translated, I don't know, several feet, what we just shown from here to here. The other thing is we never knew as to whether can you light engines on the lunar surface. We were concerned about a lot of sand because the footprints, the pads themselves were covered in many instances with sand, once the surveyor landed. The purpose of the surveyor, that was a unmanned lunar lander for the purpose of first determining or proving the possibility of soft landing on the lunar surface. Secondly, to really analyze the area. And thirdly, to establish a window, a location for the Apollo, for the manned missions, to go. So we've done that. And then at Hughes, I spent many, many years. I ended up advancing, and I worked in the secret area, in the dark area, in the black area, whatever you want to call it. And at the time, we were pretty much, I had the responsibility for all the spacecraft controls and the trajectories and mid-course correction and all that goes into the computer in order to control the spacecraft. So it was exciting times. That's when I hired Ron Sugar. So was one of the guys, had many PhDs working, cranking out equations, for that. And later on, once the Apollo landed, they knew that I had the surveyor experience, so they asked me could I recommend something that the Apollo could bring back home from the surveyor. So we came up with the idea of, how's about bringing home the TV camera? After all, it landed there 2 years earlier, 67 to 69, and it survived 2 years of lunar cold and hot, and let's examine it. So indeed, we've done that, and here's a picture of Apollo 12, where Pete Conrad with Alan Bean, sort of trying to pick up the camera, and here's in the background, you see the lunar lander, so they had to walk over and pick it up, and indeed, we were extremely proud to evaluate that. There was another first, that we were able to do. And after that, I felt I had enough at Hughes. I never had enough, what should I call it, really, patience, to really sit in one place. And at that time, they were saying, look, you have only 7 more years and you could retire. And I say, no way. And at the time I went and I submitted my resume to Al Sabroff. I don't even remember how I got to Al or who mentioned it. And of course, he made me an offer, and I left and I came over to TRW. And at TR Wonderful is where I isn't that what we called it, Marshall? is where I met Marshall Novak. I knew him fairly well. And again, I worked at various assignments there. It's interesting that one of the assignments that I had was the program manager at the time of the GRO of the Gamma Ray Observatory. That was during the proposal phase, so I managed the proposal. We won the proposal, the competition. Then we had a study definition phase. We've done that, and then we negotiated a $100 million contract. And at that time, I'm called in by Bob Walquist, who was the division manager, the VP, and gave me a cup of coffee, shook my hand. What a wonderful job. Congratulations. Now that you've done that, I have a even tougher job for you to handle. I say, Bob, you mean now that I brought in the contract, I'm not going to run it? He says, well, I'm not sure that you have the TRW culture yet with you. I don't know what the TRW culture is, but I obviously did not have the TRW culture as far as Bob Walquist was concerned, and he assigned me at the time the laser crosslink, and that was a nightmare. What we tried to do is develop a crosslink using a laser between two satellites to communicate between the satellites and as well as command from the ground and drop data to the ground. Since I've written the book, I've been speaking, and I was invited to speak at the United Nations. The reason for that was it was the 130th anniversary of the World Earth Organization. I mean, there was a picture of me and the Director General of the Earth Organization. And this is pretty much it. It's an inspirational story. I say that here is a 10-year-old boy surviving the Nazi onslaught and starvation in a mud hut, only to come to America to contribute to the space and defense program to keep America safe. I say only in America can that be reached, and I honestly have reached the American dream, and I thank America for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you for watching Peninsula Seniors Out and About here at the Western Museum of Flight in Torrance. I'm Betty Wheaton. I'll see you next time.